Good evening. Welcome to our webinar on anti-Semitism. My name is Naomi Diamond. I chair the task force on anti-Semitism of the Village of Martin's Additions in Montgomery County. Due to a very sharp increase in anti-Semitic acts, the County Council passed a resolution in November of 2022 to address anti-Semitism. Since then, Martin's Additions and 10 other municipalities have begun their own initiatives. Martin's Additions Task Force was formed to learn what to do about the increase in anti-Semitic acts in our neighborhood, including swastikas on the walls of Chevy Chase Elementary School and a sign saying "Jews not welcome," which was posted at the entrance to Whitman High School. These are schools that our kids go to. To help us with ideas as to what we can do, our task force invited the American Jewish Committee, which has conducted such programs with many organizations, businesses, and community leaders, including the Maryland governor, Montgomery County Council, and the FBI. So let me introduce you to Sue Stolov, who leads the task force on anti-Semitism for the American Jewish Committee, and she serves on the Montgomery County Committee Against Hate and Violence. Sue?
Thank you so much, Naomi. We are very glad to be here today. I also would like to welcome everyone and thank you for spending your time this evening with us for a little while. I'm going to go ahead actually and jump right in and start sharing my screen so that we can save a lot of time to have a conversation afterwards and lots of questions. First, I'd like to thank you for taking a look at anti-Semitism by itself. There's no doubt in this country that we have systemic racism. We also have bigotry against many minorities, including the American Muslim community. And all bigotries are unique. You know, anti-Semitism, like all bigotries, should be called out on its own and not always linked to racism, Islamophobia, and other forms of hate and discrimination. You know, you don't treat the flu necessarily the same way you would treat a broken arm. That said, we do hope some of the action items that we are going to discuss tonight will be used by you as a blueprint for fighting not only anti-Semitism, but all forms of hate in our community. And we look forward to your questions towards the end. I'd like to take a minute to introduce you to the American Jewish Committee and let you know who AJC is. AJC supports the Jewish community wherever they live. It's actually the oldest human relations organization in the United States, established in 1906. It was started at a time when there were many pogroms in Europe and Jews were being killed. As Naomi mentioned, I lead a task force on anti-Semitism for the American Jewish Committee. I'm a former reporter, having worked for WJLA and other TV stations. And I started doing this a couple of years ago when I got a little concerned when I was putting my electric menorah in my window. You know, I started to think to myself, this was during Hanukkah, I started to think to myself, you know, am I making a mistake? Am I setting myself up for an anti-Semitic incident in my window? And that's what motivated me to start giving these workshops on anti-Semitism. I'm joined today by Alan Ronkin, the Regional Director of the American Jewish Committee. Alan focuses on relationship building in our community and policy development that reflects Jewish values and has been doing so here for about 10 years. So let's go ahead and jump right in.
I saw what you've been posting. Hitler was right. I didn't teach you that. hide behind your screen, spewing all this hatred and ugliness. You got something you want to say? Get out of the truck and say it to their faces.
So we have a lot to discuss today. Thank you to those who were able to fill out the pre-event survey. We hope to spend time talking about what everyone would like to learn. And again, we are very glad to have a wide-ranging audience here today. Some of you may be very familiar with what anti-Semitism is, and others who may not know much about it. So we hope that all of you will take away something that you can use today in your day-to-day lives. And if we miss addressing something that you'd like to talk about, please raise that subject at the end. So let's start with a question. Are Jews a religion, a race, an ethnicity, or a people? Many people think anti-Semitism is about religion, but it's not just about religion. Some Jews practice Judaism and some do not, so it's not quite a religion because one can be Jewish regardless of observance. One can be atheist and still be Jewish. Some people think Jews are a race, but it's not just about if Jews are a race. Jews are not a race because you can convert in, and race is a construct anyway, right? And how do Asian Jews and Black Jews fit into that question anyway? So it's not just about race. Is it all about the bagels? Some Jews are not religiously observant and are just culturally associated with Jewish traditions, but others are not, so it's not just an ethnicity. Jews are a people. The word Jew actually comes from the word Judea, which is the ancient name for Israel and the ancestral homeland for Jewish people. And you could hear this in other languages as well. Jud in Dutch, Judea in German, Judea in Spanish. I know I'm not probably saying those, I'm not doing justice to the pronunciation. When Jews were dispersed from Judea 3,000 years ago, they settled all over the world, and that accounts for the diversity that we see in the Jewish community today. You can see from the slide that Jews are not only white European Ashkenazi, like Justice Ginsburg and myself, but Black Jews from Ethiopia, brown Jews from India, Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews from North Africa and Turkey and Iran, many of whom moved to the United States in 1948, when 900,000 Jews became refugees after being expelled from Arab countries. 1 million Jews in the United States identify as a person of color. Jews come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. Many Jews actually feel the government forms that ask if you are Black or white do not have a category for them. You've heard, I'm sure, the accusation today that all Jews are white, privileged, and powerful, but that's actually not the case when you look at the diversity of Jewish life. And we're economically diverse as well, with 20% living below the poverty level. Worldwide, Jews are a small group, only about 15 million people, accounting for 0.2% of the world's population. Before the Holocaust, there were 16.5 million Jews. Most demographers will say that we've still not reached pre-Holocaust levels 75 years later. About half of all Jews live in Israel, as you can see on the screen, and half live in the United States, and as well as in other countries. In the US, Jews account for 2% of the population, and actually we account for 10% of the population in Montgomery County. So to fight anti-Semitism, we really have to have an understanding of what it is. Anti-Semitism has been around for thousands of years, and there are many, many definitions of anti-Semitism, and people come up with new ones every day. The word anti-Semitism was first used in this way in the 1800s by an anti-Semitic German writer who wanted a sophisticated sounding word for Jew hatred. About 15 years ago, when the US Education Department saw anti-Semitism increasing on college campuses, they decided they needed a definition, and they concluded they didn't have the time or the manpower to do the work that would be required, so they decided to use the most widely used definition in the world. This definition was created by many different countries, including the United States, known by its title, which is the Working Definition of Anti-Semitism. It's been formally adopted by 37 countries, 27 US states, the District of Columbia, and Montgomery County, either through some sort of proclamation, executive order, or in some cases, legislation. It was first adopted by President Bush, followed by every administration since. It was made stronger by President Obama, and President Biden further confirmed its importance. It's called the Working Definition because it's not a definitive definition, but a guide. Along with the definition, there are 11 examples of how anti-Semitism might appear, and it generally appears in 4 different categories: hatred towards Jews, stereotypes and scapegoating, Holocaust denial, and inappropriately invoking Israel, such as treating it differently than other countries. Anti-Semitism is different than other forms of bigotry. It portrays Jews as both scum of the earth or in control of the earth. It comes from the left, it comes from religious extremists, and it comes from the right. It's most often presented as a conspiracy theory, like at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, where the marchers chanted, "Jews will not replace us." So what did they mean by that? That replacement theory, as it's known, promotes the idea that Jews are behind USA immigration policies. And thus, Jews allow immigrants into the country, and then these immigrants then take white jobs. So how did we get to where we are today? At 3,000 years old, anti-Semitism is the oldest hate. There was once one religion, and then there were 3 religions. And, it's much like when you get a new iPhone, it comes out, all the marketing pretty much tells you what was wrong with the old one. Deicide, the charge that Jews bear eternal responsibility for the death of Jesus Christ, was and still is one of the biggest sources of anti-Semitism. Even though it's been formally rejected by the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church, anti-Semites continue to use the charge that Jews killed Jesus to justify anti-Jewish hatred. Anti-Semitism existed in the United States at the time of the American Revolution. Early laws created by many states, including Maryland, prevented Jews from voting or running for office. And this is really a starting point as to how anti-Semitism became ingrained in American society. There are a number of books that have helped spread anti-Semitism through the years, beginning with the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, first written and published at the end of the 1800s. It's a fictional story about fictional secret meetings of Jewish leaders conspiring to dominate the world. It was published in the United States in 1920. This fictional book is the publication that's done the most to disseminate the trope of the Jewish conspiracy to control the world, and it's easily obtainable for $12.99. This book was first published in the 1800s, yet 2 years ago, U.S. Capitol Police officer was found reading it at the entrance to the Longworth House office building. I'm going to just stop for a minute here and make sure that you all can see the screen. I'm getting text saying to move the control bar, so if someone could unmute and let me know if you're seeing it, or if it's obstructing too much, that'd be great.
It's still on there, Sue. Can you either move it all the way to the top or all the way to the bottom?
Is that better?
Now it's covering the top.
Okay, it won't go anywhere else. I can't seem to make it disappear unless there's nothing in the chat. So it goes
Oh,
away.
there you go. We're good.
So, okay, so let's keep going. So about this time in the United States, Jews continued to be widely discriminated against. Signs saying Jews not welcome or Gentiles only, which is another word for someone who's not Jewish, were found in many places. Jews couldn't swim in neighborhood pools, couldn't live everywhere. There were covenants against Jews actually in my own neighborhood, the Woodacres neighborhood in Montgomery County. There were quotas for the number of Jews who could attend college. Many fields and industries were closed to Jews at that time. About from 1933 to 1945, Jews were being killed in what became known as the Holocaust. This systemic state-sponsored killing of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children, and millions of others by Nazi Germany and collaborators. And as you can see, there were many Nazi supporters in the United States at that time as well. A present-day racist and anti-Semitic book that was widely read by insurrectionists. In fact, this scene is right out of the book, calls for the violent overthrow of the government because whites are tired of being subject to the Jew, and it calls for the death of all Jews and non-whites, also easily obtainable. So what we're doing, of course, is we're kind of going through history so that you can see how we got to where we are today. Today, it easily spreads online, going clockwise on moderated platforms, connect anti-Semites. Extremist groups use it to spread anti-Semitism and recruit. These social media platforms reach children at younger and younger ages. And it's all fueled by algorithms, which are programmed to register engagement. Social media organizations don't want to remove the hate, because that leads to fewer users and fewer clicks and fewer ad dollars. And most dangerously, both in the United States and abroad, the politicization of anti-Semitism is both helping normalize it and spread it. AJC is a 501c3 organization, so we don't support any political party, but you can insert any political party into the blue box of that LA Times headline, and it is occurring. And not just in the United States, but countries like China and Russia and Iran use anti-Semitism to achieve strategic interests. A research fellow who teaches courses on propaganda and digital influence at Georgetown University recently wrote about how this is occurring. She explains that anti-Semitism in the social and traditional media of these countries is state-supported and condoned. Iran, for example, uses anti-Semitism not just to express its hatred of Jews and its hatred of Israel, but also to unite populations behind Iran that have historically been divided, such as Arabs, Persians, Sunnis, and Shias. Many people don't understand how anti-Semitism works because it doesn't fit into our understanding of systemic bigotry. So take a look on the left. When we talk about systemic bigotry, we talk about dominant groups putting pressure on marginalized groups. Anti-Semitism works differently. It surges. It moves from the edges of society into the mainstream of society. And as that happens, the intensity of it rises and the safety of Jews rapidly declines. There are times in Jewish history where you will see this over and over, where Jews have not just been discriminated against, but killed. You can see this clearly if you just look at the history of anti-Semitism on Wikipedia. It is so many pages. You can trace it starting from the classical period through the rise of Christianity and Islam, through the Roman Empire, through the modern era, and from 1945 to today. In fact, there's not a country in the world that has not discriminated against Jews. Switzerland, Iraq, France, Spain, on and on, England twice actually, and of course, Germany. The Holocaust in the 1930s, sadly, is just one example of persecution against Jews. Alan, would you pick up here?
Hi, yes, hi, everybody. My name is Alan Ronkin. I'm the Regional Director of AJC, and I'm glad to be with you. We're going to talk a little bit about whether or not all of the things that we've been talking about are simply a matter of perception, or if there is a independent reality that we have to grapple with here. So last year, according to the FBI, 55% of reported religiously motivated hate crimes targeted Jews. Now, we know that Jews only make up 2% of the population, and as Sue said, 10% here in Montgomery County, and yet 55% of these hate crimes targeted Jews. In fact, there were more than 3 hate crimes a day over that period. Now, we're talking also about hate crimes. We're not talking about hate incidents. Someone might call you a name in the street. That's not illegal. But if someone desecrates a synagogue or another way causes property damage or, is violent, that's what rises to a level of a hate crime. Now, last month, the FBI director described anti-Semitism as reaching historic levels, with anti-Semitism related to the war in Israel surpassing all categories of hate. Now, the word reported, by the way, is important because the FBI says that these numbers are greatly underreported. Now, the increase in anti-Semitism is really changing the way we live. Now, this is Sue's sister-in-law's synagogue in a New York suburb. Everyone walks through security, passes through iron gates. At her synagogue in Rockville, there are 2 police officers, and at Adas Israel, you go through metal detectors, much like going to the airport. In Montgomery County, a bit of good news, we are the only county in the country that provides grants to religious institutions for security, even though the grants do not cover the full costs. Many synagogues have instituted security fees, and we know from an annual survey done each year by AJC that many American Jews are actually changing their behavior as a result of what's going on, not openly identifying as Jewish. Now, we also know from the survey that young people are the hardest hit by anti-Semitism, and it is changing their behavior whether they openly identify as Jewish. Of those who have been targeted or seen it online, 1 of every 4 feels physically unsafe or reported being physically unsafe. Now, that was a year ago. Our new research is coming out in about a month, and we expect that those numbers will go much higher. So what does it mean to see another student draw a swastika on the desk when you're in middle school? This young woman describes what happened on a day when she was sitting in class at Pyle Middle School in Bethesda, and she currently attends college in Washington, D.C.
When I was in 8th grade and the student wrote the swastika on the desk next to me in history class, the first thing that came to my mind was just feeling very, very isolated and as if he had absolutely no care or understanding what it would feel like to be a Jewish student sitting in that class, ready to learn, and to see such a hateful symbol in what's supposed to be a safe environment.
So we asked the student you just heard if we could use her interview. And she said yes, but don't use my name and don't tell anyone what college I'm attending. She does not want to be outed on our campus and online as being Jewish out of fear. Now, this interview was done about a year ago before the war, but increasing anti-Semitism on college campuses is really not new. Now, I once heard a police officer referring to a swastika found in a school bathroom say to me, well, it's just a swastika. But it sounds a lot different to say it's just a noose, but the meaning is the same. The swastika is not just a symbol of hate. The Nazi swastika is a symbol of massacre, slavery, medical experimentation, extermination, and genocide. And normalizing incidences such as we've seen in some of the schools of late, of having swastikas found in bathrooms and things like that, really begins to undermine the taking of anti-Semitism very seriously. Now, after the start of the war, anti-Semitic instances have skyrocketed. Cornell had to lock down the campus and cancel classes for all students when Jewish students were threatened. And you can see here some of the things that were posted. Jewish people didn't be killed, Israel deserved 10-7, eliminate Jewish living from the Cornell campus, going to go shoot up an area. Luckily, the student that was initiated all of these things at Cornell was caught. But sadly, and I think this is true in many campuses that I understand, many students are still reluctant to attend services that take place at Hillel, the Jewish campus organization. At GW, members of the student group Students for Justice in Palestine glorified the terrorist killings and called for the end of Israel, projecting it right on the school library building. And there are other examples of university professors at prestigious universities celebrating the murder of Jewish civilians right after October 7th. At Cornell, a professor said that he was exhilarated by the Hamas massacre. At Stanford, a lecturer made all the Jewish students stand in a corner and called them colonizers. In this slide, you can see the hatchet, the knives, and 3 drops of blood. These are not aberrations. It's really what it's like to be a college student, a Jewish college student today. Now, it's happening not just at colleges and universities, but to younger children as well. This teacher's post ignores the overwhelming evidence of atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th. The article in the New York Times recounts in great detail the atrocities that were committed. Can't really read it without feeling like we're going to vomit. We know that all this happened because the terrorists recorded it and posted it on social media. And this is a conversation between 2 7-year-olds in 2nd grade in Bethesda. Sadly, when this happened, it was not condemned by the teacher. In fact, an administrator said that everyone had the right to their own opinion. This is like someone saying, I hate blacks, I love the KKK. That would certainly be condemned, and the same response is necessary here. Now, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act requires that schools and universities provide a discrimination-free learning environment for all students. In a letter the Education Department wrote last month to colleges and universities, they note that harassing contact that is verbal or physical and based on shared ancestry or ethnic characteristics and is so severe or pervasive that it limits or denies a person's ability to participate or benefit from the recipient's education program is a violation of the law. Now, many of you requested in the survey that we discuss anti-Semitism in Israel, because this is where a lot of the anti-Semitism of the left comes from. Now, many Jews in Montgomery County have had the opportunity to meet with survivors of the massacre and family members of the hostages who remain, such as these teens who are still held hostage. Pictures of them taken before 10/7 and as hostages. Now, individually, all of these incidents are terrible, but when you look at them taken as a whole, they create very real fear in American Jewish parents, grandparents, and children, and for the first time in their lives, Jewish students. They are seeing a world in a community in which yesterday they felt safe, and today they feel scared. This includes Stu's daughter at UMass, where there were 500 protesters outside the building she was in, yelling "Intifada, Intifada," calling for violence against Jews. So let's talk about anti-Semitism in Israel. That's what we're getting asked about the most today, and if we didn't talk about it, it will be the first question that will be asked. A couple of basic facts. Israel, as you know, is the size of New Jersey, and it's as if New Jersey was surrounded by enemies. Imagine New York, Pennsylvania, and Delaware all attacking Israel at the same time, or New Jersey at the same time. Like the United States, Israel is very polarized. The current government was elected by a very thin majority, and over the year, Israelis protested their government daily. 50% of people who live in Israel are people of color. with Israeli Arab citizens making up about 20% of the population and holding high-level positions in all fields. And Arabs living in Israel actually increased by 40,000 in the last year, according to the Jerusalem Post. So one of the questions we are always asked is about Zionism. What does Zionism mean, and what does it mean to be anti-Zionist? Zionism is a worldwide movement that resulted in the reestablishment of Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people. As it's written here, Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. Zionism and Palestinian rights are not in conflict, and you can be both pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian. AJC as an organization supports a two-state solution, and that both peoples deserve the right to self-determination and collective security to build a better future for their kids. Now, at first glance, these two images may seem very different, but they have the same meaning. The one on the left was created by the Palestinian Authority right after October 7th and celebrates the atrocities committed against the Israelis, calling for the destruction of Israel. And the one on the right, while it sounds innocuous, also calls for the destruction of Israel. Because Israel is the only thing between the Jordan River, which is there on the right, and the sea. So the slogan's meaning is that Israel will no longer exist. So when does anti-Israel rhetoric slide into anti-Semitism? I want to be really clear about this point because it's very important. We are not talking about criticism of a particular action or policy of the Israeli government. All government's decisions are appropriate for critique, and that critique is protected not only by the First Amendment, and in fact, both in the United States and in Israel, the news media scrutinizes the government. I always tell the same story, the same joke when we do this presentation. I say, what do you call someone who's critical of Israeli policy? You call them an Israeli, because at any given time, half of the country disagrees with what its government might be doing, whether left or on right. When things slip into anti-Semitism is when anti-Semitic tropes about Israel or Jews linked to money, influence, Nazism, dual loyalties, or denying Israel's right to exist as a Jewish and democratic state, or when American Jews are held responsible for the actions of Israel, or any Jew actually outside of Israel is held responsible for Israel's actions. Now, there's an easy test called the 3D test that can be used to determine when criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. It was developed by Anatoly Sharansky, Natan Sharansky, who, as you know, was jailed for 9 years in the Soviet Gulag because he was Jewish and wanted to move to Israel. Anti-Zionism becomes anti-Semitism when it demonizes, delegitimizes, or creates double standards for the Jewish state. The first is demonizing Israel, such as comparing Israel to Nazis or to hold it out as a pariah state. Delegitimization of Israel is the attempt through rhetoric or action to undermine Israel's legitimacy as a nation and its right to exist as the homeland for the Jewish people, such as calling Israel a colonialist, racist, or apartheid nation. Double standards, such as criticizing Israel in terms of what it does, but not those of other Western democracies. Saying, for example, that it was okay for the United States to fight back after 9/11, or for Ukraine to fight back after it was attacked, but not Israel. Let's talk a little bit more about delegitimization, because there are several common ways that Israel is delegitimized. Jews have been living in the area now called Israel for more than 3,000 years. We know the Bible stories, and we also know that in 70 CE, Jews were expelled by the Romans, who renamed the area Palestine to erase its Jewish ties. Colonialism refers to an attempt by an imperial power to replace the native population of a land with a new society of settlers. It cannot describe a reality in which a national group, acting on its own behalf, returns to its historic homeland to achieve self-determination while simultaneously supporting the creation of a nation state for another national group alongside the creation of their own state. From the time of the exile, the religion, language, culture, holidays, rituals, liturgy, and the history of the Jews are permeated with a yearning for a return to the land of Israel. No colonialists ever came to a homeland and revived the ancient tongue that they had spoken there. There is no other land for Jews to return to. Unlike European settler colonial powers, the modern Zionist movement's goal was never to subjugate the existing population and steal their resources and land. Instead, attempts were made at coexistence and interdependent development from the beginning, and most recently in 2000 and 2008, when concrete offers of peace were turned down that would have ended the occupation and created a Palestinian state. Now, finally, a fourth D has been added in recent years, disqualification. And that's when American Jews are disqualified from participating in progressive activities because of their support or perceived support of Israel. Sue?
So what can we do? In May, recognizing the impact of anti-Semitism on democracy, the White House took the unprecedented step to create a national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. It has 200 recommendations in it, and 60 of those recommendations were taken from the American Jewish Committee's action plan to fight anti-Semitism. It's really interesting because AJC is a worldwide organization. So 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, they were helping European countries set up and encouraging them to have government, basically cabinet level posts that were fighting anti-Semitism. So when the White House was going to come up with this strategy, AJC then brought some of these leaders from European countries to share what they have been doing that's been working. I'm mentioning this because in our pre-event survey, someone said that they'd really like to know things that have been working. So many of the things that have been working in some European countries have been incorporated into the White House National Strategy on Anti-Semitism. And what it does is it focuses on a whole of society approach, urging action from state and local authorities, civil society, community leaders, business leaders, the private sector, and individual citizens to take action. The conversation that we're actually having now here today is one of the action items. How is anti-Semitism a threat to democracy? Well, an article in the Atlantic magazine describes it succinctly. It has disastrous consequences for society because people who embrace conspiracy theories to explain their problems lose the ability to rationally solve them. So if you think Jews control the banks, you lose your own ability to take control of your finances. If you think Jews control the news media, you won't believe anything you read. If you think Jews control the government, you lose the ability to understand how government works and whether or not your vote is going to do anything. This is how anti-Semitism erodes democracy and decreases public trust. And that's why the White House took the unprecedented step to release a national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. So, I know many of you are probably saying, oh, I mean, I'm just one person and this is way too big a problem for me. Well, people don't drink and drive anymore, right? And people don't smoke as much, right? So this is because one person somewhere started to make change. One of the things that we did last year was we made phone calls we started an effort to reach out to about 25 libraries in Montgomery County. And what you'll see if you look on the top shelf, you'll see a little sign that says Jewish American Heritage Month. And we asked libraries to display books about Jewish American heritage. And our focus, we didn't want the focus to be on the Holocaust. I mean, the Jewish community doesn't want to be known for the Holocaust, right? So you can see all the different kinds of books, and we gave the libraries book lists. And this was a great effort that we were able to see the change. This is a picture of the Bethesda Library. So some of the recommendations in the national strategy are things like recognizing Jewish American Heritage Month, for example, and sharing Jewish culture and food and music, and inviting Jewish community members to share their family stories and their Jewish identities. International Holocaust Remembrance Day is another opportunity to educate. Now, we know efforts like observing these days, putting books in the library, we know from our surveys that if you know a Jewish person, or if you know a few facts about the Holocaust, you're more likely to be aware that anti-Semitism poses a threat to democracy. Another thing you can do is note Jewish holidays on your neighborhood calendar of events. Call out and confront instances of anti-Semitism. You know, what is your plan as a neighborhood if an anti-Semitic incident or some other hate incident should occur in the neighborhood? It helps to have some kind of a plan thought out in advance. What if a friend or colleague makes an anti-Semitic statement? You know, it's important to recognize that some statements are made out of ignorance, and because someone makes a comment doesn't necessarily mean that they're anti-Semitic. Point out the comment in the moment. You might not realize this, but what you just said is actually anti-Semitic. And let me explain why that is. I mean, I know you really don't want to offend anyone, so I'd like to share with you my thoughts about what you just said. Speaking to your children will vary based on their age. It's really important for you to share with kids ideas for coping with difficult situations, such as talking to you about it or talking to other trusted adults in their lives. You know, young kids want to know that you and your teacher and their teachers are going to do everything they possibly can to keep them safe. So they need to know the importance of telling an adult if someone's being bullied or being made to feel bad because of who they are. Older children also need to understand the importance of speaking out when something happens and not being a bystander, and not being a bystander that doesn't do anything. You know, we could probably do a whole 45 minutes just on this slide. And we're going to be sending out some resources that you should find useful that are going to expand on this. Education is also very important to gain an understanding of the different ways anti-Semitism appears today. AJC has produced a booklet of terms, also available online. If you'd like some of these booklets to bring to your office or your school, we can provide you with these. The most important way to confront anti-Semitism is to build relationships, because relationships help to dispel conspiracy theories. You know, many of us do a lot of volunteer work. Use those opportunities to volunteer in the community where you can meet and develop relationships with people who are not Jewish. Join a county committee or volunteer for a county commission. Take Leadership Montgomery, where you can interact with people that you might not easily meet otherwise. And get to know your lawmakers. You know, thank them when they recognize and speak out about anti-Semitic incidents in the community. If you experience an anti-Semitic incident, it's very important to report it. There are many ways to report an incident, including to the Department of Education and the Department of Justice, and we'll also be sending some more resources out about that. I'm not going to list them all, but if you don't report it, then Montgomery County government doesn't know it's happening. If it's not documented, nothing's going to be done about it. If it's a serious, dangerous incident, of course, call 911. If not, call the non-emergency number of the police department. Every month, in my position on the Montgomery County Committee Against Hate and Violence, we review these incidents. Last month, there were 25 incidents reported, actually, hate bias incidents in Montgomery County. 16 of those were anti-Jewish incidents, and 8 of those occurred in our police district, which is the Bethesda Police District. And finally, understand the impact to society. Each one of these dots represents an extremist group. And whether they are anti-LGBTQ or anti-immigrant or anti-Black or anti-Muslim, they have one thing in common, and that is that they are all united because they are all also anti-Semitic. The SPLC, who tracks these groups, says that anti-Jewish hatred is a core facet of other bigoted ideologies, and that because of this unifying factor, we won't be able to get rid of anti-Black racism without getting rid of anti-Semitism. Both the SPLC and the national strategy calls for a more robust interracial and intersectional approach to combating anti-Semitism in America, such as holding workshops on the intersection of anti-Semitism, racism, and xenophobia. Reciprocal learning about anti-Semitism and other forms of hate help identify how to counter hate more effectively. We like to close the program with this comment from Eric Ward, because attacks on the Jewish community often have long-term effects on the feelings of security of many beyond the target, including neighbors, other minorities, and those of other faiths. Anti-Semitism is a societal problem. Just like we would not ask the Black community to solve the problem of racism, we can't ask the Jewish community to solve anti-Semitism. The Southern Poverty Law Center Senior Fellow Eric Ward very succinctly explains why anti-Semitism is a problem for everyone because of its effect on democracy.
Let's go, Mom. We're gonna be late. Hi, Mr. Tony. Mom, what's that?
Nothing. Just get in the car. Let's go.
Who did that?
Come on. Right now. In. Get in. Right now. Let's go.
Did you paint it or something?
Move it. Seatbelt on. Right now. Put your seatbelt on.
Hi, Mr. Tony. Let's go.
So please grab a pen or a pencil and jot down my or Alan's contact information so you can reach out to us in the future if you have any questions. And one of the best ways that you can help efforts to enact the White House strategy too is if you can recommend us as well to other organizations or your place of work, so we can become involved in the DEIA organizations in various other places in the community. So what I'd like to do now is we're going to start to take some of the questions. I hope that you will put in the chat. I haven't been able to read the chat, but I hope that you will put in the chat some ideas for things that you have that the neighborhood can do. And we can discuss some of those too. So Alan, I think you've probably been looking at the questions, and if you want to go ahead and start reading some of them.
Sure. Well, I'm going to ask Alexis, who was actually looking at questions, to help me out with this. So the first question that pops up here is about the use of Yiddish. And in fact, no, depending on the word, of course, some Yiddish words are offensive in and of themselves, but just to use a Yiddish word is not generally taken offensive. It's interesting, though, because there are some people who use the word Jew as an epithet. That's offensive. If you use the phrase, for example, to Jew someone down, that's offensive, where you invoke an anti-Semitic trope or stereotype in how you talk with a Jewish person. The second question is, why are the schools taking such a soft disciplinary approach to instances of anti-Semitism? Well, I think there's a wide range of responses that are going on within different schools. This is hard. Schools are educational institutions. Their job is to convey a set of values, to make our kids into better citizens, and to impart with them, how to live in our community and how to live in our society. I think a lot of them are grappling with how to address anti-Semitism long before what's going on with Israel. I mean, we already saw, as Naomi mentioned earlier, the spate of swastikas and the amount of anti-Semitic incidents in Montgomery County schools. And so you can help me, you probably know the details better than I do, has been absolutely enormous. And the schools are trying to deal with it, I think, as best as they can. But there is no magic bullet when it comes to anti-Semitism. And I think they're going to have to figure this out with community support, and making sure that they can, make it as unacceptable and rare as you might see other forms of racism and bigotry in the school context. And of course, just to end on one little note there, every school level is different. It's different in elementary school than it is in high school, and it's different in college that it is in other levels of education. And so educational approaches have to be targeted and customized to each learning stage that a kid is at. And that's complicated. That's hard.
Okay, we had a question. We have a question about a statement and there have been a couple questions on this topic, when different phrases can have different meanings that are interpreted differently, such as from the river to the sea. Can you talk about what you can do to explain why that is anti-Semitic, and if people have different meanings with those kinds of statements, the history behind it?
Well, from the river to the sea, in my view, is not so ambiguous. In fact, I find it hard to interpret it in any way other than the erasure of the state of Israel. And if you talk about the erasure of the state of Israel, you have to ask yourself the question, what happens to Israel's, 7.5, 8 million Jewish citizens? And I think you have to draw your own conclusion as to what their fate would be in a state controlled not by the Jews. So I think we know enough about Jewish history to know that when people threaten the Jewish people, we need to take them seriously, and we need to respond appropriately. So I think that to me, it's not so ambiguous. And if there are people who are concerned that they're not being understood, perhaps they should find a different way to express themselves.
Okay, we've had a couple of questions on this one. If people are saying that the actions of the Israeli government are disproportionately impacting anti-Semitism throughout the world, and how would you respond to that, number one? And number two, would this anti-Semitism fade if, for example, Israel engaged in a ceasefire immediately?
Well, I don't want to talk about hypotheticals, and I really don't want this to sort of devolve into a conversation about Israeli policy. But let me say this. There was a tremendous outpouring of anti-Semitism long before Israel did anything in Gaza. While they were still bandaging the wounds of 10/7, there were thousands of protesters in the streets of London and New York and Basel and other cities around the world supporting what Hamas had done, talking about liberation at any cost and all of that. So I don't know what the impact would be of an immediate ceasefire, but I know that this war could end tomorrow if the hostages were all released and Hamas surrendered. So I think there's other ways to achieve that. And again, going back to before this war, we've seen a tremendous uptick in anti-Semitism from the right, from the left, from the people who are ignorant. And it's not just confined to the Israel-Hamas war. And I would also say, too, that we need to watch this very carefully, because there are really three basic kinds of times when anti-Semitism tends to spike. It tends to spike in times of economic concern. It tends to spike during election years. It tends to spike during Jewish holidays and festivals. And yes, when there is violence in the Middle East, it also does tend to spike. We are almost at the perfect storm of those things. And I think that we need to be really vigilant and not get distracted and take our eye off the ball when it comes to combating anti-Semitism in this environment, and not be shy about it. If we don't stand up for ourselves as Jews, no one's going to stand up for us or with us. We'll only get the respect of our community if we stand up for ourselves and speak our truth.
I'm just going to add to Alan, to what you said. Anti-Semitism has been around for a long time. It was around before 1948. It's been around for thousands of years. But even if you just look at our own schools, in the spring, there was one 3-day period where there were 9 anti-Semitic incidents in Montgomery County schools.
There's a question about asking for a little bit more information about the impact of anti-Semitism on democracy.
Well, I think Sue said it really well. Anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. It's a societal problem. And whether there's a conflict in the Middle East or everything is fine over there, anti-Semitism erodes our democracy. What we saw over the last few years is the undermining of our democratic institutions. People losing trust in our government, people losing trust in our media, people losing trust in a lot of our systems. And we've seen that go along with the rise in anti-Semitism. I think there's certainly a correlation, if not a causation there. And I don't think it's accidental. And if we talk to our friends at the SPLC, I'll give you an example. So we all remember the shooting in Buffalo. Tragic. There were 11 African Americans killed in a supermarket. If you looked at the manifesto of the guy who did the shooting, it was 44 pages long. It had 11 pages about African Americans and 33 pages ranting against Jews. There's something going on here. Another good example, again, goes back many years. But I don't know how many of you remember, in 2019, there was a massacre of a number of Jews at a Hanukkah party in Muncie, New York. And it turned out the guy who came and attacked the party with a machete, by the way, and killed all those people and wounded all those people, the family said, well, he was off his meds. Well, first of all, the person had to plan a 2-hour bus trip from New York to Rockland County to commit the massacre. But why, if a person is off their meds, does their default setting go to attack Jews? Why don't they go down the street and attack the Catholic Church or the Latino community, somehow there's something baked in to our culture that sustains this idea of anti-Semitism. So we have to be vigorous. We have to, and we, for the sake of our own democracy, for the sake of living safely in this country, we've got to make sure that we're vigilant about this. Someone here in the chat is asking about Deborah Lipstadt. I think Ambassador Lipstadt has had a tremendous positive impact. She is a world-class scholar. She's someone who speaks her mind, and is someone who really knows what she's talking about. And she has the respect across the political spectrum. And when she speaks, people listen. And I think the president's strategy, which she was, intimately involved in crafting, just take a half a step back for a minute and think about, this is unprecedented in the history of the United States for an American president to set out a plan to counter anti-Semitism, to even recognize that anti-Semitism is a problem. And Deborah Lipstadt had a lot to do with that. And I think we're lucky to have her.
Alan, I want to respect people's time.
Yes, thank you.
An hour of a session. In a minute or two, Alexis will be putting a survey link into the chat, and everyone who attended, we hope you'll fill it out. And everyone who attended will also be getting a follow-up email with many more resources. I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight and spending some time with us to talk about this. And maybe, Alan, you could close us out.
Sure. Thanks, Sue. Well, I want to echo Sue's thanks to all of you for being here. I think at our peak, we had about 100 people, which is amazing. I just want to leave you all with a really brief message tonight, which is this is not a time to despair. This is a time to stand up, to have Jewish pride. And if you're not from the Jewish community, to stand up with your Jewish neighbors. We are, I think, really at an inflection point. And while it looks grim, and it really does look grim, we have to look back, I think, at the arc of Jewish history. The arc of Jewish history tells us that when we stand up and fight for ourselves, we can overcome pretty much anything that's thrown at us. And we can only do that if we all work together. We can only do that if we are strong and we take pride in ourselves. And I think, as Sue mentioned, and I think I'll add to something that she said earlier about how to combat anti-Semitism. One of the ways to combat anti-Semitism is to be proud, is to have Jewish pride, is to not hide from it, and to stand up and to be who you are. And I would encourage everybody to consider that. And for our non-Jewish friends who are here tonight, thank you so much for being here and for standing with us. And hopefully by the time we meet again, this problem will have dissipated. But until then, we have to work hard and work smart and work together and stand with each other as allies. And with that, I wish you all a good night.